Congresswoman, thanks again for joining me. I want to get your reactions to the January the 6th hearings yesterday. Did you watch them? Did you have any major takeaways? Did you see any new evidence that compelled you to change any viewpoints you might have?
No, I believe it was a political circus, which is what I anticipated. But the Democrats really are shameless. The fact that they chose prime time, 8 p.m., to host this hearing. Typical congressional hearings are during the work hours at 10 a.m. In addition, they hired the former president of ABC News, who also covered up for Jeff Epstein. This was taxpayer-funded, hired as a producer for this partisan witch hunt committee with hand-picked members by Nancy Pelosi. And what really struck me, I mean, I've been in high-profile hearings before with particularly impeachment the Russia hoax, is that even in the basement bunker with Adam Schiff, you still had Republicans who were able to cross-examine the witnesses. You still had Republican members who were able to look at all of the evidence. There is none of that in this. You're seeing selectively edited and cherry-picked evidence. You saw that last night with edited video footage. You saw that with edited tweets, with edited testimony. Jason Miller came out and said that they did not provide the whole context, but yet there's no Republican-appointed members to ask those important questions. So I think the American people are smart. I think they see right through this. This is the Democrats' attempt to distract from all these crises that are impacting people day to day, such as inflation, the border crisis, the crime crisis across America, the baby formula shortage.
I've got two takes on this, and I think, of course, I agree with your assessment, and I think my audience does too. I don't think necessarily, though, this was designed for this audience. I think this was designed for two groups of people. The first group are the people who don't like the baby formula shortage, and they don't like where the economy's at, but they're very exhausted by Donald Trump. And just to be reminded that this is the sort of chaos that seems to follow Trump where he is, it seems like that was the goal, to remind people of that. And it's almost more of a 2024 strategy than a 2022 strategy, just to remind people that Trump was a very divisive person. Even if you like Trump, as I do, and love Trump as so many others do, it's still, I think that's kind of where they're at. And the other group, and this is really more where I want your take on it, is to divide a wedge between people in Trump world, to try to pit people in Trump world against each other. And this is what I was kind of surprised by. It seemed like this was a strategy to get people fighting amongst themselves who are loyal to Donald Trump or have previously been loyal to him.
Well, that's the strategy the media and Democrats have pursued for years now at this point. And I will tell you that while it may be a lot of coverage in the Beltway and Washington, D.C., among media elites, the American people don't really care when they can't afford their grocery bills, when they can't afford to fill up their car with gas because the price of gas has doubled, when we potentially are facing food shortages because of the challenges with failed national security policy around the world and what's happening in Ukraine, which is because of Joe Biden's weakness on the global stage, I believe, but also, again, because of those increased costs. So, as much as Democrats and the mainstream media may desperately try, I still think that the American people want a focus, and gosh, they want a primetime hearing on inflation. They want a primetime hearing on why are gas prices so high and how do we lower them. The Democrats are never going to give them that, so this is a distraction. And yes, they are trying to divide members of Trump world, but even, those that testified with video are saying that the videos are selectively edited and cherry-picked and not provided with the full context.
Yeah, and I do think that that's the design, is they want us to talk about that, and that gives it more juice to the news cycle, talking about the selective editing, which was obvious and it clearly done and designed to provoke and irritate folks like you and me. But I want to ask about the premise of having these primetime hearings, which of course is egregiously propagandistic and political. But I'm actually have maybe contrary take here, that I think it's also clever in a way. And I would encourage you guys, when you guys take power, no doubt next year, to do stuff like this, to get attention to your key issues by using theatrics. And this is something where the Democrats are much better than the Republicans traditionally on this. Evaluate that premise. And do you think that there's anything to that?
Well, certainly Nancy Pelosi has changed the institution of Congress and has shredded all precedent. And, we have seen the subpoenaing of members, which I believe is illegitimate and unconstitutional. We have seen that she has stripped members of committees. But when Republicans take over, Adam Schiff is not going to sit on the House Intelligence Committee. These precedents have been set. And it's going to be important for Republicans, again, to focus on the issues that matter to the American people, but hold the Democrats and Joe Biden accountable for their absolutely failed government, failed leadership. So I think tough oversight is going to be really important. I think not hesitating when it comes to subpoenaing and not hesitating when it comes to going after, for example, Hunter Biden, who is extremely close, being the president's adult son, with business ties to the president of the United States. So we intend to have strong leadership. We are already preparing very robust oversight and an accountability agenda when we work to earn back the House. But our laser focus has to, and this is what we're committing to the American people, has to be on the issues and the crises that are impacting people's day to day. Again, reining in the spending that has caused inflation under this administration, making sure that we secure the border. Inflation just hit another 40-year high with consumer prices surging 8.6% is breaking news. So, that list is long, and we intend to bring as much focus as possible. The other thing that I think Republicans need to do is Democrats are very obsessed with the media coverage in Washington, D.C. and the media elites. This country is a big country, and voters across the country aren't tuning into the media elites because there's such a historically low distrust in media. We need to get out and around America, Main Street America, and highlight these issues.
Yeah, and they're not talking about these hearings. There's no doubt about that. Elise Stefanik is on with me, Congresswoman from New York. And thank you for noting the inflation numbers. Huge inflation news just breaking 10 minutes ago, and we'll have all that for you, Breitbart.com, throughout the day. And I'm sure my colleagues on the station will cover that in greater detail. But I want to ask you about some other stuff that's going on. In particular, this apparent attempted assassination of Justice Kavanaugh. Are any of your colleagues in the Congress, particularly Senator Schumer, accountable for any of this? Because they have had rhetoric in the past that seems to have incited violence, and we know full well if the shoe was on the other foot, if any of your colleagues had said some of the things that Schumer had said, and there was an attempt on the life of a Democrat Supreme Court justice. We never stop hearing about it. What is your take here?
My take is that Senator Schumer, Democrats, and the President of the United States and his White House fanned these flames. They encouraged protesters outside of the Supreme Court justices' homes. You have a very politicized Speaker of the House in Nancy Pelosi who's refusing to take up the Senate bill, which would provide security, increased security for our Supreme Court justices. She is actually blocking that clean bill negotiated by the Senate from coming to the floor. And what was her comment? She said, they'll be safe over the weekend. This is just days after a vicious, violent criminal attempt on Kavanaugh's life. And it's not just, Justice Kavanaugh, but he is the father of 2 young kids. And, he has a family. And the fact that Democrats, again, fueled these flames, encouraged protests outside and an attempt to influence justices as they're putting out their decisions on these cases. First of all, that's illegal, so it's breaking the law. But secondly, it's about pressuring the court and submitting to the will of the left. The Supreme Court must maintain its judicial independence. It must maintain, again, that separation from the politicization that we see day to day in electoral office and political campaigns. On one hand, the Democrats are obsessed with focusing on January 6th, but when it comes to threats on the Supreme Court justice's life, they're not taking up the bill in the House, which would pass if she brought it to the floor.
And why do you think she's not doing this? Because it just seems like the biggest no-brainer of anything we've discussed over the last year and a half. It is. I don't even understand the objection.
I believe that they want to protect the leaker. And the leaker broke precedent. I believe what the leak, I've actually co-sponsored legislation that is a crime to leak documents from the Supreme Court. And we need to pass that because this is irreparably damaging the court. The Chief Justice spoke out on this as well as other justices about how truly damaging this is to the institution. So they're more concerned about the leaker rather than the Supreme Court justices. And we do not want to be in a situation where anybody faces any political violence, where any type of political violence is tolerated or encouraged. But make no mistake, Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, and the White House encouraged protests and activism to try to pressure the court. So Nancy Pelosi, she should bring up the bill negotiated by the Senate, which is a clean protection in terms of increasing security for the justices.
So one thing that you did recently on one of our Saturday broadcasts with Matt Boyle is you helped walk us through the Republicans' plan for Fight Back, because we're in agreement on what the true crises are facing this country. It seems like the concern with a lot of our audience here is whether or not the Republicans, who do not have a great track record on this stuff, have the playbook to fight back and to hold the people accountable who are, first of all, getting stuff wrong, i.e. the Biden energy policy, the indulgence of Hunter Biden, et cetera, the open borders. But also not just they're getting stuff wrong, that there's no accountability, that people seem to fail upwards, they keep their jobs, no one even seems to get roughed up publicly, figuratively speaking. What is the plan here?
The plan is to make sure that we have robust oversight over every single agency, every single cabinet secretary, every White House official, that we are not hesitant when it comes to subpoenas, that we are not sort of letting the Democrats drag out the timeline, which they have done in the past. And Republicans need to be very, very aggressive. Look, I've learned in the bowels of the Capitol in the skiff with Adam Schiff conducting those basement bunker intelligence committee hearings for the impeachment Russia hoax part 1, that we need to be very tough when it comes to holding them accountable. And transparency is really important. I, in my office, have a long list of projects when it comes to oversight, ranging from getting all the information regarding the illegal flights of migrants into New York State, flown in the dead of night, which the Department of Homeland Security has refused to respond to going after some of the abuse that exists within the Department of Justice and the FBI, both broadly when it comes to the FISA process, for example, which we shine a spotlight on among the House Republicans on the Intelligence Committee, but also very specific district issues that came up in my district with FBI informants being part of crimes that led to the loss of life. So I have a long list. I'm preparing that. We're encouraging all of our members to prepare that and work with the committees to make sure that we are ready on day one. In addition to that oversight agenda, having a legislative agenda, which is really, really important. Already working on border security bills that have the support strongly of all the Republican conference, making sure that we have bills when it comes to being tough on China and holding China accountable, actually looking into the origin of COVID.
Yeah, amen on that one too. Yeah, sure. And one of the things that I would add to the list is that we're watching that broke last night is Alejandro Mayorkas extending covert migration pipelines to cities throughout the country. And we know that Joe Biden is working with foreign governments to create more additional migration beyond what we already have. And this is something that we could do 3 hours a day on this one topic, and yet it barely gets a mention even from me at Breitbart, which is why what's such a concern is that sometimes the biggest stuff in the country just gets overwhelmed by other nonsense.
We have to do a lot. We have to do a lot simultaneously. We need to make sure that Congress is able to do everything. So having the right teams in place, the right members on the right committees are going to be really important. And all these crises are happening at the same time. And I think back to my first press conference as House Republican Conference Chair, I laid out all these crises and really laid out our overall crisis messaging strategy. And the New York Times made fun of it and said, well, there's so many crises, the American people aren't going to be able to pay attention to all of them. Well, they are paying attention because they're all impacting them. So we will have a plan in each of these areas and then pursue it like a laser and really tune out the media. I've learned that in this job just because I've taken tremendous hits from the leftist media and their allies in Hollywood. Yeah. You have to focus on the task at hand and remember that you don't work for the media, you don't work for the editorial boards, you work for your constituents who vote and who you represent.
I want to get your take also. This will be the last one for today. Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, again, Republican from New York. I want to get your take on some of the wokeification of our corporations. It seems like the culture wars now are not as much being fought in Hollywood as they are in the corporate boardrooms. And, looking at a pretty unbelievable public ouster of a top Disney executive. You've at least one young child. Forgive me if you've more. What are your thoughts on the fact that it seems like the corporate America is trying to dictate values to the American families right now?
I think this is backfiring. I mean, look at what's happening to Netflix and the fact that they're having a real impact on their stock price, for example, as they've, as there's been pressure from some of their employees to maintain this woke far left identity. Look at the backlash to Disney in terms of their approval ratings among their consumers. Sure. At the end of the day, these are companies. They are not social justice entities. They are not political entities. And it's not just corporate America. You're seeing the wokeification of everything, of higher education in our colleges and universities, but also K through 12 schools. You even see it in child child care centers in terms of pushing social justice, in terms of the left's vision of what political activism should be. So I'm deeply concerned about that. I think that's why you're seeing some real shifts generationally. For example, an increase in homeschooling. You're also seeing people being very, very thoughtful about where they're purchasing, whether it's, their entertainment. You're seeing a decline in terms of Disney. And I grew up, I loved Disney when I grew up. It was sort of the heyday of Disney. And their job is not to be political warriors. Or look at, for example, MLB and the outcry regarding the Georgia election reforms, which, by the way, more people voted in Georgia post those election reforms than before. So that whole media hurricane was absolutely wrong, which we've seen before. You and I know that. So people need to stand up, and people need to hold these companies accountable with their wallets and with their pocketbooks, and I think they are.
Thanks, Congresswoman. I really appreciate it, and I hope you come back soon.
Thank you.